ठीक है, ऐसे कुछ नहीं है, can always start. Okay. And how do you turn this on? Apurva, do we have to turn this on or? I can't figure out.
I think it's on.
I think it's on, so
Okay.
there is no button.
Yeah, it's on. It's on. I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great. Are we ready? I don't know if people are thinking that we have our academic quarter, but maybe we still start. So we have some people here and some people online. Warm welcome to our Bridging Perspective, Equity and Inclusion in Indian Schooling panel discussion, which is organized jointly with Jitandra, the Global Innovation Network for Teaching and Learning, and our close-net network, which is the Cultivating Change Through Global and Sustainable Education Network. And we just yesterday learned that we have 600 people in our email list. So we have become quite a big and wide network. Warm welcome. So a little bit about the network first. So we are kind of the umbrella network for our SDG 4 seminar and anything that has something to do with global and sustainable education in our faculty. So we organize a lot of keynote speaker events. Next one is in April 9th. Rati Adiputri will talk about the Finnish education from a Southeast Asian perspective. Warm welcome. If you want to join our email list, Apita is the one who is managing the list, so you can email either myself or Apita, and we will join you to the list. So every year we organize SDG 4 seminar. Last year the topic was teacher education 160 years because University of Jyväskylä celebrated the teacher education. Ounno started the teacher education in Finland. Now it's 161 years ago. This year, 2024, we will have it again in November, and the topic will be one of our English medium program, DEICO, Development, Education and International Cooperation, which is a joint English medium master's program between our faculty and the Faculty for Humanities and Social Sciences, is turning 20 years. So we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the DEICO program. So the topics will be around development and education. So if you join our close-net email list, you will also later receive information about the SDG 4 seminar. And our first research project around the close-net has been the Jitandra-funded Education for Emergencies, which started 2 years ago. We started with defining what education for emergencies mean. We have had colleagues from India, China, South Africa, and Ghana to define and discuss the meaning of education for emergencies. Then we moved on working towards the pedagogical principles, and now currently we are having a climate change pedagogy project together with Kerala and Ghana. And this is the third phase of our Education for Emergencies, which is the research project under the close-net network. And we have so far one publication, hopefully more to come. And then going to today's panel. So the topic is equity and inclusion in Indian schooling. And for us to fully understand what the equity or inclusion looks like, we need to understand actually what an equitable society or institution look like. And even more importantly, we need to understand how the inequity or the exclusion look like so that we can build a inclusive and equitable society and institutions within. And today we are talking about and learning from our Indian colleagues and the Indian economist and intellectual, and also somehow like a little bit of my idol, professional idol. Amartya Sen has talked about the kind of the failure of Indian education system in a sense that it doesn't provide equal access to each child, and also question the quality. And he's Indian himself, so he has a better position to talk about Indian education system than myself. But he compared the system to China, which is also a big country with a lot of people, and how China has been able to build an education system that is quite fair for everybody, but always there are, of course, regional differences and so forth, the same way than, for example, in Finland. But to compare, for example, India and Finland is quite difficult because the size and the population is so different. But now today we are learning from our Indian colleagues and looking into the social inclusion and how available and inclusive is the education system for its diverse learners. And we have our panelists, and I will be moderating the panel. I'm Heidi Layne, Senior Lecturer in Global and Sustainable Education in the Faculty of Education and Psychology here in the University of Jyväskylä. And I will now present our panelists, and then they will also present themselves. So we have first Ira Joshi, who is an assistant professor at Azim Premji University. Her teaching is in the domain of early childhood education. She teaches courses in early childhood education, both in Master in Education and Diploma in Early Childhood Education programs. Ira also anchors the Diploma in Early Childhood Education program and works closely with the course faculty to support the program objectives. Then we have Nimrat Kaur, who joined the Azim Premji Foundation in 2011 and is currently a part of the School of Continuing Education and University Resource Center, Azim Premji University in Bangalore. She has contributed to the development and validation of individual and institutional quality frameworks, which have been used in various academic and field engagements across the states. And then lastly, but not leastly, we have Jitandra Sharma, who joined Azim Premji Foundation in 2011 as a resource person for the program on education leadership and management in Uttarakhand state, which I always fail to pronounce this state, but hopefully you can correct it. State team, and was part of the core group who contributed in developing framework as well as training modules for conducting head teachers' professional development courses. Besides that, there's a long list of activities that he's been involved, but I let our panelists to introduce themselves first. Please have a short introduction.
Okay, so I'll start. So namaste sabko. Good morning and hua menta. My name is Jitandra, as Heidi ji just shared, and I have been part of Azim Premji Foundation since 2011. My current responsibility is mainly to work with the school principals of Azim Premji schools. There are 9 such schools, and our entire effort in Azim Premji Foundation is basically like in the education field. We are working towards ensuring equity by working with public schools, and our own schools are also, we call them demonstration schools. So whatever, we recommend in national policies, we try to practice it, and we try to see whether, it can be practiced in the context of similar to public schools. So I come with that sort of experience, and my association has been more with the practice part of education. So in today's sharing, I think I'll be bringing some experiences from the practice aspect. So thank you for organizing this and giving us this opportunity.
So I'm Nimrat, and in addition to what Heidi said, the school I belong to basically is responsible for the professional development of various functionaries across states. We work already in multiple states across the country. So the School of Continuing Education tries to reach states where our presence is not already there in the form of field institutes. I have also been supporting the work of policy since work related to policy. You may be aware that we have this new education policy come out in 2020, and we had the national curriculum framework for the foundational stage, that is 3 to 8 years in 2022, and now the school education curriculum framework last year. So it's been a very collaborative process of development. So I've been supporting some states in this work, as well as working with national bodies in various committees, working groups, to kind of be part of this process. And so very happy to be here, and I hope we'll be able to share some things about our country which are new to you.
Thanks, Nimrat. Good morning. My name is Ira. And as Heidi has already introduced myself, I'd just like to add that I kind of anchor this program, the postgraduate diploma in early childhood education at the Azim Premji University. It's basically 40 credit diploma program for working professionals. It's in a blended mode, so online and as well as some face-to-face interactions. And the idea is to kind of, how do we equip and improve the quality of the early childhood education in this country. So it's more like a, professional development in that sense program for these working professionals who are teachers, administrators, members from NGOs, and so on. And before this, I was working with organizations to support the early childhood education in the country by partnering with government, by partnering with other organizations using technology and so on. Thank you so much, and looking forward to our interaction.
Thank you. And then we will next have a little introduction about the Indian education system.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I think I should go there, right? So I can change the
Yeah.
slides, or would you?
Either, if you want to come here, I can help you to tell me
then
when to change.
right,
Yeah, 'cause
sure.
it's a little bit difficult because here is.
Yes, I
Yeah,
understand.
and then
I understand. Thanks.
Yes,
Thanks.
but
So I'll
it's
just
up to
speak
you.
from
You
here,
can
right?
Come and stand here. Or.
No, this is fine. Thanks. So Abita, Heidi, the three of us, we had a little discussion, and we thought that given that we're talking about India, we should have a little introduction, try and keep it really small. So a brief overview. So we're a large country. We have some 28 states, 8 union territories, and education is on the concurrent list, which means it is the business of both the central government, and state governments. So that's one part of it. There are about 1.5 million schools. You can see the data here. 265 million students, mostly in government schools, just about more than half in government schools, the rest in private, aided, government-aided schools or others. 9.5 million teachers, of which about 50% are teaching in government schools. 22, just to give you an idea, a sense of the diversity, we have 22 official languages in the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution. And a survey conducted by a non-government organization identified 780 languages that are spoken in the country. So that's the vastness. We could go on, Heidi.
Yes.
Thanks. And then a little bit about access, equity, equality, which are seen as 3 main pillars of our education system, something that we try and achieve. So our policy documents refer to these 3. And access here is very narrow compared to what Heidi referred to, of course. This is actually physical reach, how many children are able to reach schools. So if we look at a survey done by the by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. This is a National Family Health Survey from 2019-21, and it tells us that in the period of 2019-2020, only 18% of children in urban areas and 12% of children in rural areas age 5 were able to access early childhood education. So this is pre-primary school. So this is what the data tells us. There are other sources of data, but I think this was something that actually goes down to households and collects all this information. We also have a very robust system for collecting data in our country, which is called the Unified District Information Systems for Education. And so this is all government data. Our GER is pretty good at the primary level. At the upper primary level also, it's okay. But it decreases as we move to the secondary and the higher secondary level. So I'll talk about the stages as well. But basically, when we talk about secondary, we're talking about 14 to 16-year-olds. And high secondary, we're talking about 16 to 18-year-olds. So the participation decreases as we proceed through the school stages. In the next.
Yes.
A few equity indicators, gender parity index, we're doing pretty well. The ratio of boys and girls, it's good at all levels. Minority enrollment is 18% of the total enrollment. The last large-scale census that we had in the country regarding population found that that was only in 2011. We haven't had a census since then. That 19.3% of the population are minorities, so it's kind of proportionate. In terms of socioeconomically marginalized groups, that's also okay, it's proportionate to the population, the total population. Children with disabilities, only about less than 1% are actually enrolled in schools. And if you look at the occurrence in the population, it's about 2.2%. So we're not doing so well there. If you could go on, Heidi.
Yes.
And out of school children, again, there are varying figures brought out by different organizations. But if we look at the government data from 2017-18, the National Sample Survey Office does these large-scale surveys in various fields. It's a sample survey, but it's a large-scale survey. So about 32 million children in the age group of 6 to 17 years were out of school. Contested figure, of course, but this is a representation. We could. The National Achievement Survey is an indicator of how children are learning. Again, this is a large-scale sampled test that's done across grades 3, 5, 9, 3, 5, and 10. So if you look at how children are doing, we see that as we move from grade 3 to grade 10, the performance becomes poorer. It's not so great at the primary level also. And the last National Achievement Survey done, the last one was in 2021, and the one done before that was in 2017, before COVID. And across grades, the learning levels have fallen. So you can see some impact of COVID there. Heidi, if you could click, please. Thank you. We do have a right to free and compulsory education act in place. This is for 6 to 14-year-olds. So in our country, that would be grade 1 to grade 8. And there has been an amendment. This was through a constitutional amendment. A clause was inserted in the clause pertaining to right to life, giving children of this age group the right to free and compulsory education. And there was also a change in Article 45 of the Constitution, which said earlier that the state shall endeavor to provide ECC to all children. Now it is that the provision for ECC to children below the age of 6 years. So there is a increasing commitment to this age. We could go on, Heidi. Thank you. The structures are about to change. So we are the cusp of change in our country. Many changes are happening as we will have the last year and as we proceed through the next couple of years. And right now the structures are that early childhood care and education is for 3 to 6 years. Then we have elementary school, which is a right. Primary and upper primary. So this is for 6 to 14-year-olds. Secondary school, elementary school for us would be grades 1 to 8. Again, grade 1, children would be aged 6 years. Then 14 to 16-year-olds, grades 9 and 10. And then higher secondary school, which would be 16 to 18 year olds, grades 11 and 12. The new structure is going to be, I'll just mention it now, but I'm sure as we go on, we'll talk more about the whys and whats of the new structure. So basically now there's a foundational stage which integrates the early childhood care and education stage with grades 1 and 2. So the provision is for ages 3 to 8, and this is related to the curriculum and pedagogy of early childhood education. Next, there's a preparatory stage for 8 to 11 years, grades 3 to 5, a middle stage for grades 6 to 8. So this pretty much remains the same. What has changed in the secondary and the higher secondary is that they're being now seen as a single stage instead of 2 separate stages. So, so this is the structure that we will be moving towards. And if you could just, and this is the last, we thought it would be useful to just talk about the structures in place. And I think as it was the case in your country earlier, we have a separate kind of a structure for the early childhood care and education part of it and separate for school education. So we have the Ministry of Women and Child Development, which looks after the ECC part. There's a central institute, the National Institute of Public Cooperation and Child Development, which looks after the curriculum, the training, all of preparation of teachers, etc. At the level of states, there's a Department of Women and Child Development, and then there are these structures in place to support the teachers in the ECC centers, which are called Anganwadis, which literally means courtyard. So every habitation would have a Anganwadi, and you would have a worker there, or who are also known as Anganwadi teachers in some states. So this would be a 10th or a 12th grade pass out who has received some training in the curriculum pedagogy assessment of early childhood care and education, and might be helped by an Anganwadi helper. As far as school education goes, so not at the same level in terms of district or state, but we have the Ministry of Education, then a central body called the NCERT, the National Council of Educational Research and Training, which is the academic authority for curriculum assessment, also develops materials at the central level, which states may or may not decide to take up. At the state level, we have a similar body called the State Council for Educational Research and Training, which would be typically responsible for developing the state curriculum framework. Given the diversity, there is this need for states to develop their own curricula and materials also, and various other functions, all related to supporting schools and the implementation of curriculum. At the district level, we have the District Institutes for Education and Training, which is positioned as academic leaders of the district. So the idea is to decentralize and cater to diversity within the administrative structures as far as possible. So the district institutes would be doing something like teacher training, developing materials maybe at the district level. So for example, a district level institute might create a dictionary of local words in languages which are prevalent there, but not the medium of instruction. And then we have the block level resource centers, which typically would be responsible for 75 to 100 schools. So in most states at the block resource center, you would have a special educator, you would have equipment, you have materials. So it is a center for teachers to come to for any kind of support that they need. A block resource center might also help in schools in terms of planning, implementation, etc. And closer to the school still is the cluster resource center, which a coordinator in the center would be responsible for maybe 8 to 10 schools and would be involved in providing on-site support. So I hope this kind of sets the context and doesn't kind of complexify the whole thing. So that's it from us about the context. Thank you.
And our online participants, if you have any questions or comments, you can open your microphone or you can use the chat to comment, and also audience here in Ruusupuisto. Please feel free to think about questions to our panelists. And I would like to mention that I really appreciate that actually this topic of today's panel, the equity and inclusion, came from our panelists. And it's also something that I think Finland as a society and as our education system can learn from, and really important topic to discuss about. And I was earlier mentioning about Amartya mentioning about the challenges of Indian system providing kind of equal access to education for all the children. When we talk about inclusion, we can kind of think it from a special education perspective, or we can talk about it more from a social inclusion perspective, and how do we actually provide access and quality access to education for all the children. We would like to now learn from you in your education context. At least for me, what I have really learned from Indian system is also that despite the challenges, there are also foundations like Azim Premji Foundation that is really doing a lot of very remarkable work in the remote areas and trying to provide more equitable and inclusive education system. So for our panelists, what does the inclusion and equity mean to you in your context?
So if I start from the policy perspective, and I refer back to the National Educational Policy 2020 that I mentioned, I think what you said, Heidi, about inclusion not being limited to just disabilities is something that people have to kind of get used to. When we work with teachers, when we work with functionaries, when you talk of inclusion, immediately it's children with disabilities. But of course, for us, the definition has been, of course, more comprehensive. And if we look at the policy, it refers to, I will kind of try and state what it actually defines in terms of, the groups that need equitable access, quality learning, and need to be included in all processes. So a term called the socio-economically disadvantaged groups is used in the policy. And this term is operationalized in terms of gender, which is women, especially women, girls, and transgender identities. Then geographical identities. So this is something that the policy emphasizes, talks about the fact that there are certain geographies where students might not be able to access the kind of education that would enable them to, continue further. For example, the primary schools that I referred to during the presentation, you would have one within 1 kilometer of which students stay, and an upper primary school would be within 3 kilometers. So that is walking distance. But the moment they move to secondary school, they might have to commute to a city. There might be problems with language. There might be problems with, being from a different place. There might be just problems about being able to stay and learn. So geographical identity is something that the policy brings up, and also refers to the need for a kind of a special provision for specific geographies. So that's one part of it. Then there is groups that are in vulnerable positions in terms of socioeconomic conditions. So these would be, the definition goes beyond groups that have been marginalized historically to the urban poor, children of migrant families, students who come from backgrounds which are disadvantaged in terms of the kind of facilities they have at home, etc. The policy refers to victims of child trafficking or the children of people who've been trafficked. So that's, I think I've got the points here because I didn't want to miss out on anything. And of course, children with disabilities. And the policy specifically refers to learning disabilities. And I'd like to mention here that in 2016, we had an act called the Right of People with Disabilities, which kind of broadened the definition of disabilities to include learning disabilities. So there's a lot of focus on that in our country. The policy believes, if at a very basic level, that of course all children should be in school, students from these communities, and all of them should receive education of a comparable quality. And those who need any kind of specific support should be able to get that kind of support. So that's how the policy is looking at inclusion and equity.
So-
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So if I may just extend Nimrat's point, and I'd kind of focus on the early childhood education space. The National Education Policy 2020 talks about universal provision of quality ECC so that all children entering grade 1 are school ready. So now if we were to look at this statement from the policy, one can look at three important aspects that are being covered here. So one is that ECC is available and accessible. So the required structure systems are in place so that children can attend ECC. The distance, it's not very far from where children are. Affordability, it's available either free of cost or it is affordable by children, and it meets the needs of the family and the families in that area. So that's the access and availability. But the other part, an important one, is participation. So if children are in ECC centers and spaces, are they all getting equal opportunities to participate in the learning experiences in that center? Which is very important because just attending an ECC center is not enough. Children should be able to have the agency, should have the choices, and should be able to meaningfully participate in the experiences. The third thing that, again, Nimrat talked about is the support. So is the necessary support and enabling environment provided to all children, irrespective of where they come from, which languages they speak, what is their sex, which families they come from, and so on and so forth. So that's the third important part. And again, situating it in the context that children who are coming from these socially disadvantaged backgrounds or marginalized families are already at a disadvantage than children who may have these resources or these choices at home. So in that case, how do we kind of build the required skills, the competencies for children so that they are able to cope in the EC centers and also are able, they are prepared for grade 1, and so on. And just one quick example here, because I think it's very important that when we are thinking of the support, we're not just thinking about education, because the disadvantage could also mean that children do not have the health, the well-being, or they may not have access to good nutrition. And I think that's important to see the intersection of education with health, nutrition, and these other aspects which are very important to help all children or enable and provide the opportunities for all children to be prepared for lifelong learning, to be prepared for formal education in grade 1. So just wanted to bring in this aspect of looking at the intersections of all these other important services that children would need and are important for children to transition to formal school. And Jeet may be wanting to add about the formal school.
Yeah, so should I just continue on that same question? No. Okay, so before I think we go more in what exactly is happening on this front in terms of practice, I think the way I see it is that you have policies which are one way is to look at equity and inclusion, to basically look at the policy whether that addresses the issue fairly well. Then we have programs that basically help policies implementation. And the last part is what you see happening every day in schools and classes. These are the three broad areas for understanding what is happening on the equity and inclusion front. My knowledge is that on policy and program front, I think we have done very well over the years, and through our national education policies and curricular frameworks, we are doing fairly well. It is the last bit, the most important part where, the policy, whatever you guarantee, a student or a child, that experience is, that happens at the classroom level or school level. That is where I think we have made significant progress if we compare it with maybe previous decades. But that is where I think we need to do most of our, attention and intervention and improvement, all that. So another way of looking at it, I think, and there are good frameworks to understand equity. The one that I found very useful is the 4A framework. I think if those who have read about right to education, they may already know what is this 4A framework. It's by somebody who worked at UNESCO. Her name is Katerina Tomasevsky, and this 4A framework basically means that whether education is available, that is the first A. Availability को ensure कर मतलब to ensure availability, I was shifting to Hindi. The second A is basically accessible. The school may be next door, but it may not be accessible to you because you don't have this, your identity card. Maybe you don't have enough money to pay, or you don't have, the family doesn't want to send you to that school. So accessibility is the next thing that one needs to ensure. Then it is about acceptability, whether the public, whether the families, whether children, do they find education that the state is providing acceptable? They may have issues with the language of instruction. If it is not English, they may not want to come there. They may have issues with the treatment they are getting in schools. So you go there one day, ideally you should be happy to go back to school next day, but it may happen that next day you don't want to go because the kind of experience you had the previous day. So that is basically about acceptability. And finally, the final A is about adaptability. So who has to adapt? Whether children have to adapt based on schools' practices and norms and systems and whatever they have to offer, or whether a school need to adapt themselves to the individual needs of students. That's where and it's very clear who has to do the adaptation bit. It's the schools and teachers who are supposed to do it. So if you look at all, this whole framework, it basically, gives a very clear, understanding of equity and inclusion, and it also tells us or informs us how to basically go about it. So in India, we can say that we have done a lot on the first two A's, which is making education available and accessible, because you can do it through policy and programs. So that's where we have done well. When it comes to acceptability by the public and the adaptability factor from the school side, that is where we have to do more work. We have schools everywhere, but you may find that if people may not trust the quality of maybe public schools, so they may not want to go there. So we have to do something to raise the quality of these public schools, and that's why Azim Premji Foundation has taken up this whole issue of improving quality of public schooling in India. Because if you want to do something in equity in India, and education is the major vehicle for doing it, then we have no other choice but to raise the quality of public schooling in India. That's where most of the disadvantaged and underprivileged children go. So these two are the major areas I feel where we can talk more like with some specific examples, but and the data on enrollment, on how many schools are there in public and private. And in India, see, the major issue is that because of the scale and diversity, it is really difficult. And also, because of this status that education is equal responsibility of states and central government. So, you may have some very good program or policy at central level, but the state government also, they need to take that initiative and that they are going to implement it or, take that forward in their own state. But if they have other thoughts, they may not, comply with it, or they may not, align with those ideas, and that's there because of the kind of governance or we have. Or so so what the point I was trying to make is that, see, at one point we were talking about common schooling in India, and in a country like Finland, I think you have it. In many other like countries, the public schools are so functioning so well that whether you are rich or poor, you get to access high quality education, and that can become your pathway for whatever you want to achieve in life. In India, we have a multi-layered system, and it even though we work in education and for very long, it is very difficult to find a way to have common schooling. We may finally arrive there, but currently the fact is that we have this multi-layered schooling, and therefore we talk about education of comparable quality. See the difference, common schooling against education of comparable quality, because that's what I think we're trying to achieve in the short term. In the longer term, maybe common schooling, but at the moment it is basically how can we provide education of comparable quality. So therefore, if you read policy documents, you'll find something which appears little contradictory on surface. On one hand, you may read something which is basically advocating common schooling, but at the same time, you may read another recommendation that talks about having special schools where you will basically select promising students, and they will get free and very good quality education. So on one hand, so it seems that, okay, are you contradicting yourself? But it may be a a measure taken for in the interim period, like it's not forever, but okay, what can we do for the immediate future? So let's provide some quality education to maybe a smaller group from those sections who don't have good quality education, and maybe these people will be like role models for the others, and they can get inspiration from this group. So so that's the complexity of ensuring equity and inclusion in India. So that's just one example from the policy front. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. And I think it was interesting when you were kind of comparing India and Finland. I was just thinking from the slides that Nimrat mentioned that you have 9.8 million teachers, and we have a little bit less than 6 million people in Finland. So kind of in comparison, I think, I mean, also what was mentioned, availability, accessibility in Finland, also we can say that, that's something that is in place. But then nowadays more and more the acceptability and adaptability is maybe something that we need to kind of work on. So in kind of different context, similar challenges in terms of, for example, in with the diversification of the society, not all the families are, for example, accepting the schools in their neighborhood anymore because they think that there's, for example, too many immigrant families in the schools. And so there are these challenges that we are facing that we need to, and I really liked also the kind of the socioeconomic excluded groups being mentioned in the policies, maybe something that is for us to learn from. And Nimrat, you mentioned also that you are going through a lot of reforms at the moment. What do you see? What are the opportunities with these reforms to kind of create a more equity and inclusion in a system, and what challenges you think that will remain? I think some of these were already mentioned, but anything that you want to, any of you want to add?
So I'll just very broadly, I think the first step towards equity and inclusion, and the policy specifically mentions this, says that without universalizing early childhood career and education, the rest of the policy is just words, literally. It's not going to work. So this formalizing of, the new structure of school education, where the foundational stage, 3 to 8 years, children will slowly, of course, it'll take time because like you saw, we have different structures. And I think we have a lot to learn from your experience with this transition. And we are already seeing, signs of it not, obviously not being easy, but it might be harder than even we anticipate, because it's difficult to break these structures. So, but the point is that going ahead, if we make ECC a part of school education, and some states already have pre-primary classes, so 2 minus grade 1. And I think Ira will be able to talk more about this, so I'll leave it for her. So one reform is that, where you bring children into the school system early. The second, of course, is something that's always ongoing. The whole, what Jeet also mentioned about the kind of schooling experience that students have. So this whole curriculum and pedagogy, what should it be like? The policy actually mentions school culture, etc. And the NCF takes pains to illustrate how this kind of a school culture and school processes can be created, which will be inclusive and equitable. So that's one part of it, I think. The other is we are expanding the curricular areas, not, in the sense that we are bringing back things that we lost. So with the whole focus on science, mathematics, languages, and the social sciences, we've lost out on the arts, physical education, well-being, certain interdisciplinary areas, vocational education, working with your hands. So I think bringing in all these areas will offer all students an opportunity to do something that they enjoy and maybe want to come back to school for. So that's another reform I see that could be significant. Another thing that the National Curriculum Framework does, of course, in 2017, the National Council of Educational Research and Training came out with the learning outcomes for the country, which states adopted or adapted as they wished. But this whole movement towards competency-based teaching and learning, it has been concretized in the NCF in terms of learning standards. So we have curricular goals and we have aims for each subject. We have curricular goals and competencies that are to be achieved at the end of each stage. And although the foundational stage curriculum details out illustrative learning outcomes, and these are not detailed out for other grades, I think the emphasis being on the foundational stage more so because it's seen as being very critical. So that is an attempt to ensure that all students are able to achieve learning of a comparable quality. Another thing about these learning standards is that the focus is more on doing and learning the methods and processes rather than just the content. So I see these as some major shifts. And lastly, teacher education. There's a huge shift on making teacher education better in our country. It's a whole different story about teacher education in our country, so I won't go into that. But the policy has a lot of emphasis on improving teacher education. So Ira, if you could expand on the...
Yeah. Okay. So clearly there is a clear commitment in the policy with respect to inclusion, diversity, equity, and that's kind of a running theme all the way from ECE to higher education. I think one thing that would be interesting to think of is when we look at, especially when we look at the early childhood education space in our country, the ECC is, the three core service providers for ECC in our country are the government, which is the public sector. We have the private sector, and we have the non-for-profit sector. So what happens is the government or the public sector, they have been running the largest comprehensive ECCD program in this country since 1975, which is the Integrated Child Development Services Scheme, which really addresses health, nutrition, education, all the different aspects, and follows a life cycle approach. So, looking at adolescent girls, looking at pregnant and lactating women, children, in the 0 to 3 age group, as well as the education component for 3 to 6 year olds. So really follows that approach. It is kind of directly takes on from, the goal is to support children's learning and development in the early years and, think of a holistic development. This is available. I mean, we have like 14 lakh Anganwadi centers. I think that would be 1.4 million ECC centers run by the government in the country. So that's the extent and scale of this program, and really looking at aspects related to equity and inclusion. The other sector, which is very fast growing now, is the private sector. And the private sector is mostly driven by the objective of profit. It really kind of, addresses a very special need in the education system. One is to get children to get admission into grade 1. So really looking at school readiness in a very narrow, limited form of only academics. So reading, writing, that kind of thing. And the other thing is, of course, it's, fee paying. These schools are fee paying. They range from very high-end, high-paying schools, preschools, to affordable private preschools. Again, a market that's growing in the country. So people who have money can go to the high-end ones, send children to the high-end preschools. Parents who seek English language, which is again an aspirational thing, would send their children to these affordable private preschools with the underlying objective that perhaps because they're teaching in English, they're of better quality, which necessarily may not be the case. So that's the private sector emerging in rural areas as well as in urban areas in the country. So in terms of challenges and issues related to equity, I think it's very clear that affordability and having the resources means that you are going to a private space. The public sector, unlike in Finland, is generally considered more for children from disadvantaged backgrounds because of the kind of services it also provides beyond education. Also, there are questions related to quality of the preschool component or the education component in these government-run childcare centers. So that's the second thing. The third point I want to bring about in terms of things to think about, while the policy, it presents a very enabling framework when it comes to use of a mother tongue or local language. So the policy proposes that in early years, children should be exposed to their home language, the mother tongue. That should be the medium of instruction in these EC spaces. And all languages of children are welcome in the EC space, so that children don't feel alienated. It's a big transition for a child from their home to the EC space. But again, going back to the other point that I was making about these private spaces, because a lot of English is the aspirational language, many times what happens is the medium of instruction is English. Children's home languages may not necessarily be welcome. And when we say home languages, we're not talking about all children having one local home languages. We are talking about many, many languages in the classroom. So what happens is that children who may be from a different, culture or speaking different languages may again feel alienated in that environment in the preschool. So again, that's something that we really need to, while the policy acknowledges it, how is it that in our practice, the teachers can, create a curriculum which kind of looks at the local context, which brings in the local context, the languages, the cultures of children into the classroom, so that all children feel welcomed. What Jeet was talking about, how can schools or, EC centers acknowledge that and bring all those aspects? How can families be involved, right? Can there be a good, family involvement and participation in the EC centers? So how can we kind of do that more effectively? I think these would be some interesting things to think about and work on, which again goes back to the last point that Nimrat made about the teacher training and teacher professional development. How can our teacher training programs really explicitly have modules on inclusion, diversity, because the teachers themselves have to believe in it to be able to do it or, adopt it in their classrooms. Nice. Do you want to please add?
So continuing with this reforms thing. So I'll talk about, I think, 2-3 major and recent developments in Indian education, and they are going to, I think, make, significant or ground like path breaking changes in ensuring equity and inclusion. Teacher education. So the kind of, if you look at Indian policy document today, it basically, it says, okay, we are going to lift the status of this teacher education profession, and those who want to enter in this profession, they will be selected properly, and they will have to go through like a 4-year proper course for it, as a pre-service. Because in India, if you want to really work with teachers and improve their professional competence, you have to basically do it in service mode. So while they're teaching, and you hardly get like 1 or 2 weeks for that, and that is very little time to basically improve anyone's competence. And when it comes to teachers' competence, you definitely need a very high quality pre-service education, as you have it in Finland. So you don't worry much about the in-service bit. So we have taken steps in that direction, though. If you go deeper into it, you'll find there are ways of getting a teacher degree after your undergrad degree in 2 years. So there are some concerns in that front, but at least you have, you are basically saying to universities, okay, you have to run a proper 4-year course in like next 5 years or 10 years. So that is going, if that gets implemented properly, we will have a much better pre-service teacher education in India in the next 10 years. But what to do till that happens? So I think for that, since we have like 9 million teachers teaching in schools, so we have to make sure that, we find ways of making in-service teacher development, professional development effective. And that's where I think an organization like ours is doing quite good work. Like we are there in different blocks right there, going to every single school, trying to see them at work so that we know exactly what they are teaching and how they are teaching. And then we can basically involve them, even if for a couple of hours every week, for, discussion on how to do it better. So there is a lot of focus on, practices in this whole in-service mode of teaching. So instead of going into like further detail on that, I'm saying that there is something significant happening, not only at policy front, but also in practice. And there is a role of an organization like ours who are doing good work in-service teacher professional development. One significant thing you will notice if you read the latest document, which is the National Curricular Framework, and also the policy that we recently came up with at the national level, you will find that the entire document is written keeping in mind the practitioners, teachers. So a lot of dilution happens, from policy to actual practitioners. And so we have paid attention to this fact that you should write the document in a form that teachers can directly access it. So you better avoid all the, jargons that, that may not be comprehensible to them. So the document has become huge, and it has even illustrations of even lesson planning. Why? Because that is our need. They need to know, okay, what is a good lesson plan? So we have included it in such a high level document. You may not probably do it here, but our context demands that. And that's why we have done those changes. So that is, I think, one significant thing. Another very important development that will go a very long way in ensuring equity and inclusion is this idea of school complex in India. There is a dedicated chapter on that in our policy. See, we are in a position, we may have a large percentage of schools where the enrollment is like 20 or 30 children. So in such a school, it is very difficult to provide all the resources, human and other resources, because there are only 20, 30 children in that school. And you never know if, some of them will also be migrating to cities. So you will have to actually close it down. So how do you make sure that, a school is available within the walking distance and at the same time resourceful? If you have added that every school will have an art and teacher or physical education teacher. How can you provide an art teacher to, such a small school? So we have come up with this idea of a school complex. And in that school complex, the idea is that within a range of 5 kilometers radius, there are maybe 20 schools. Some of them are large schools, like K-12 schools. Some of them are very small schools. But all of them will be part of one school complex. And some decision-making autonomy will be given to the head of the school complex, so that decisions are not taken at district or higher level. Decisions can be taken by the head of the school complex, and you will make provision for maybe a well-resourced audio visual room at the school complex level, and every week you can basically have all these kids traveling or walking to the nearest bigger school. So they are part of the larger complex. And if a teacher is on leave, or you can basically send another teacher, because there is a group of teachers associated with that school complex. The provision, or at least the policy recommendation, is that teachers should also be hired at school complex level, so that it is easier. They are local, and the school complex head can basically take a call where to place them as per the need of the school complex. You can have a physical education teacher who is going and working at least one day in one school. So that whole idea, I won't go into further detail of that, but this is the structural change the policy is trying to bring, and that will actually ensure that you don't have to close small schools, and at the same time you will make sure that resources, both human and other teaching learning resources, are available to these schools. A third major change is what already Ira ji has already spoken, that the attention being given to this, the early years, 0 to 3 and then 3 to 8, that will go a long way in ensuring that students have good health, because they get fed well through that midday meal and other nutrition program. And by the time they reach the eighth year, or the completion of foundational stage, we are hoping that we will ensure foundational literacy. So if we are able to ensure foundational literacy, many of them will progress in the education system. And if you don't do that, then there is no hope. That is the basic minimum thing you have to ensure if you want them to progress further in the education ladder or the classes. And our own data, because we work in 7 states, we work in about 60 different districts. So our own data says that there is a major crisis on foundational literacy front. It was always there, but due to COVID, it has gotten worse. And though there are efforts from government and non-government sides, we are still facing a crisis in learning, or like there is a lot of recovery that we need to do. And so if you can ensure foundational literacy at the right time, you can really help these kids to progress further, get what is guaranteed by the education system, and then maybe find better ways of livelihood, or improve their overall well-being. So
Heidi, if I may just add one point, which I kind of, I think, missed saying, was in terms of these policy reforms. Another thing that in the earlier slide, Nimrat had shown that there are quite a few children who still don't have access to ECCE. So what happens to those children? And I think there's another provision that the new policy talks about. It's kind of a 3-month preparatory module for children who may not have had access to ECCE. So when they come directly to grade 1, so that these children are not left behind, there's a 3-month kind of module that's, being given, which is more play-based, activity-based, so that children who've not had the opportunities are still able to kind of cope. And this continuum of 3 to 8, which again is a curriculum and pedagogy continuum, again ensures that children still are following a play-based, activity-based approach, which really takes into account their culture, their context. The curriculum is as per that, so that children have a smooth transition and are able to cope in the formal school environment. So these were 2 points that I just wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ira. Before we open the question for the audience, just a short comments on the variations of the quality of school experiences. That would also be interesting because we're mainly now focusing on the policies. So yeah, so Ira and Jeet, mainly you work on this.
So the variation in terms of school experiences, Indian children experience. So I think I said it when I first
Yeah.
spoke that because it is multi-layered, like even the government system, you'll have a very poorly functioning government school and you will have a very aspirational government school. So, and they are both there, so some of us, feel maybe shame in saying that I studied through a government school, but there are others who say I studied from a government school. So there are like Navodaya Vidyalaya or, there are schools, where government invested good money, proper, like they had, enough teachers, enough infrastructure, and that helped these schools do well. And in comparison, some other schools, they are also run by the government, but, not much resources are available. There is only one teacher dealing with 50 kids or sometimes more. And there is hardly any support available. Some of them are in remote areas where, nobody goes for inspection or even, just telling that person that, it's good that you are at least coming to school, walking maybe 10 kilometers a day. So within government system, you have this variation, and one of the reasons is that you wanted to make it accessible or available to everyone. So even if you didn't have proper building or not enough teachers, you said, okay, we'll hire some contractual teachers, and you made provision for some availability of one person and maybe one room, which is a community room, something like that. Later, when we had Right to Education Act, then we did have government clear directions that we will define what would a school mean. Anything can't be a school. You have to have a certain infrastructure in place, and teachers must have some training. Without that, you cannot define that as a school. So that came quite late, like in 2009. And so everything, like to do it at national level, is a huge challenge, and we understand it because we run 9 schools. So 9 schools versus like one kitna 15 million school kitna hai, huh? 1.5 million schools, huh? 1.5 million schools. So we understand it because of our own practice that it's not easy to run such a huge system. Though, but it can be done, I think, if because there is provision by the government that you have a district level, institute for academic purposes. There is a district level department to look into administrative aspects. So in terms of your system, things are there, but maybe the district institute doesn't have all the faculties who are supposed to be there. So, and they come from, maybe they were teachers once and they didn't get enough support or like capacity building to become teacher educators. So those kind of issues are there. And within private sector, because it is a huge private sector catering to almost 35 to 40% of our students, there, I think the top 10%, 20% may be doing very well in terms of academic development. Rest of them are very questionable quality private schools. The only thing they offer is probably, English exposure. Other than that, or maybe, there is a teacher in every class. But other than that, if you look into other aspects, or how good they are doing art education or physical education, they may not be doing at all. So it's not that only government schools are struggling, like some of them, but private schools, maybe not many people have looked into that.
Yeah.
And so they are equally, struggling.
Yeah.
So, so we have, I think, a major task at our hand, how to really improve education. We have 250, 260 million students studying. And I think maybe about 200 million out of those 260 need better experiences.
I just want to say one thing, that irrespective, and we all have this experience, all of us go out into the field very often, irrespective of the infrastructure, resources, the challenges, there are some teachers who are doing exceptional work. And it's really has to be noted that with very little support, they're still getting on very, very well. So I think it all depends on the kind of teachers and school leaders we have to a large extent, like everywhere else.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. You want to add, Ira, something?
No, I think the points have been covered. I think we would leave
Yeah.
some time for question and answers.
Yeah,
That would be
yeah.
good,
It's very good. I think some watching some YouTube videos, I think the most innovative teachers also are in India. And when I was teaching in Singapore in the National Institute of Education, I remember I was teaching every year also to teach for India scholars. And there, I mean, the enthusiasm was something that was really kind of has stayed in me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But please, audience, online and here, any questions, anything that you want to ask from our panelists?
So since the last thing we spoke about was the variance in school quality, and something we spoke about was how there's a lot of variance in government schools as well across the system. Do you feel like this variance is sort of split between like along the central and state government school line? Because some of the schools that you spoke about, like the Navodaya Vidyalaya or the Indian Vidyalayas, which are generally
You want to take that?
having better quality, are actually not
I can.
versus the state
Mhm.
ones. So
Right. So I would say that it depends on the state itself. Of course, Jeet mentioned the Navodaya Vidyalayas, which are schools for students. The students go through an entrance examination. They're basically in rural areas, so they get an opportunity to access education of a higher quality. I would not say that it is limited to schools run by the center or by the state. For example, Delhi government schools are a very good example of what happens when governments invest 20 to 30% of their expenditure on schools. Similarly, in other states as well, there's this whole drive on developing schools of excellence and PM Shri schools, etc. And again, the focus is on investment, teacher capacity, etc. Of course, there is some way to go in, kind of improving these, but there are some states which are trying to do this at every level. So starting with these, we can hope that the whole push towards strengthening the public education system will go in the right direction. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, Apita will take the microphone just in case that the online audience also hears.
It's on. Hey, maybe it's on. I don't know. I'm Anna-Leena Kähkönen. I teach here at the Department of Teacher Education. What you said earlier on about there was a good number of primary schools to cater to all of the pupils, but when you go higher in your education system, then the distances become a lot for some of the students. And I felt that was an interesting parallel with something that we have going on in Finland also, because of the number of children is decreasing year by year. So some of the areas, particularly, I guess, in the east and in the north, are becoming very sparsely populated. And we have already like a lot of kids who take maybe 2 hours by bus to get to school. So I would be interested in hearing what do the solutions for you look like, or is it more like that kids just do drop out of school at that
Right.
point?
You want me to take it? Or you want to-
आपको कुछ immediate कहना है
Okay.
तो क्या?
So basically, I would say that there are some provisions for students who are in very remote areas. So we have the Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalayas, which are schools for girls. Now I'm talking about residential schools. So enabling these students to access upper primary, secondary, high secondary schools. That's one part of it. And there's a thrust now on building more and more KGBB Vidyalaya. There are schools for children of parents from marginalized communities, which are run by the tribal welfare departments and the social welfare departments in states. These are residential schools, some good, some bad. Our provisioning has largely been, because of the nature of programs that we've been talking about, has largely been till the elementary level, and the RTE is also till the elementary level. Unfortunately, we've always, I don't remember the exact proportion, but it's something like roughly 1:5 in terms of the availability of government schools for the secondary level and government schools for the elementary level. So that provisioning also, though we have another scheme to cater to that. So because of that, the availability of schools has been a problem. Another reason has been, the fact that till the elementary school, students tend to come to, till the elementary stage, students come to school. But then, like you said, if they have to move out, or, then they're 13, 14-year-olds, then that becomes a bit of an issue. Students from, say, a tribal village who have to now go to the nearest city to study might feel, that they don't know the language, the the culture there is slightly different. So they do tend to drop out. Yes, as you could see, the access was much less. Anything you guys want to add?
And there is, like, if you go to the rural side, rural India, you'll find that some of the migration happens for education, like, because, if they want to go for higher education and maybe better schools, they shift maybe 10, 20 kilometers, and one member from the family may be just living with them in a rented place, so that, that person is basically, running the home, cooking food, and making sure that, kids get a school nearby. And because of, I think, the difficult geography in many regions, it would be difficult to make sure that they get, beyond elementary education available in walking distance, or, without having to, have any vehicle to take them to that school. And I think the other fact would be the right to education commitment. The current commitment is for up 6 to 14 years, like as per the law. So you can't, so for that, the government is committed to make the, provision, and they have done it. But if we commit, they say, okay, our senior secondary level will also be, under Right to Education Act. That would mean, making so many changes and ensuring that, all those who are up to, let's say, 18 years of age, they find a school. So that's why there is dropout happening after the elementary level. And many of them actually, like, there is one aspect that we haven't talked about, and that is basically how are we preparing our kids for the vocational side. And the recent policy has now made that provision, and Nimrat ji is working very closely with the group who is, designing the curriculum and textbooks. She may talk more on that. But I'm just mentioning this equity perspective, like in here, after seeing your vocational schools, and that you have clear streams, and you have made, and there were, I think, 17 vocational schools that were in Helsinki. We saw one of them. And they were really very nicely resourced. And so in our case, I think we have just started that journey. In the past, we had done some work which didn't quite, work. Now we have again a new framework, a new ideas how to basically make it happen. So the point I was saying about this secondary education is that many children, once they are 14, they have to earn. So many of them have to go and work. And so their vocational education is happening out of compulsion, and maybe in different, in like circumstances or conditions over which we have no control. It's governed by the economics of that area. So that may be another reason why, after 14, or many of them, once they start earning, they have money to spend. They may not be that inclined and motivated to go back to school, especially, if it is not that, appealing, or interesting. So that is another reason that what happens after the age of 14. and what are the demands from the family front, and whether those kids will continue or not.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Nimrat, towards the end, you said that what really matters behind quality education is quality teachers and quality school leaders. And that's what research points out repeatedly as well. So what would you say is the future of teaching as a profession in India?
So, see, I should have mentioned it when we were talking about the policy reforms. There's a huge push, as Jeet has already elaborated, on teacher education, but there's a huge push also towards improving the work conditions of teachers, improving recruitment processes, and improving performance management. You know that in our country, we didn't mention, so I don't remember the exact data because I didn't put it on the slide, but there's a huge proportion of teachers who are contract teachers. So like Jeet said, when the whole business of, in the 1990s, the whole business of increasing access to primary education started and converted into these long-term programs, which we still have, the endeavor was to get teachers on board. So this whole, getting local teachers, which is desirable. It is desirable that teachers be from the local community, but these kind of contractual appointments, there are a lot of contractual appointments, there are a lot of ad hoc appointments, there are a lot of guest teachers, which persist till day. So within the same school, you would have teachers with very varying salaries, with very varying service conditions. So first of all, that needs to be sorted out. And the policy also talks about the teacher. The policy itself, it puts the teacher at the center. Of course, the learner has always been at the center, but for ensuring that the learner remains at the center, the focus is on the teacher. So that is one part of it. The second part of it is, of course, the kind of pre-service education that teachers have. The kind of in-service that is required before we actually move on to teachers who've gone through the entire pre-service program that we envisage. So that's there. The policy also provides for 50 hours of compulsory training or in various modes. So it could be an online module, it could be face-to-face, it could be something else, that teachers and school leaders need to go through. Even the school complex idea comes from the idea that we have very small schools, which may even be single teacher schools. So teachers are very isolated. The idea of getting schools into a single complex is also so that teachers can support each other and kind of help improve the processes, etc. So there's education, there's recruitment, there's working conditions, there's performance management, there's support, strengthening the support structures, and there's training. And for school leaders as well. So the idea is that a teacher would have to undergo certain kind of certification to become a school leader, which I think is a practice here also. So I hope that answers the question. It's like huge. So.
And just something to add to that. See, we already have some programs which are 4-year teacher preparation programs. Azim Premji University is running one of those. And NCRT in its own like regional institutes, they are running this program, and there are some universities. So the experience with that is very good. All those teachers are more qualified, and they find employment much sooner, or maybe they get placements. So I think if we can have more such programs, so those who are entering purposively in teacher education field, I think they will definitely get better options for employment, and wherever they work, I think they will have the required competencies. The only area I think that is still not guaranteed is the disposition. Many of them may not want to work in rural areas. Like in our schools, we are doing recruitment every year, and many of these 4-year, trained teachers, since they have opportunities in international schools, in more favorable locations, they would not want to come to our schools because we work in remote places and we have very many challenges. So if you're working with, in a class, you feel that, they may all be at the class level, but you may find that half of them are not at class level. So your whole competency gets challenged there. So you would rather work in a favorable environment where, those students are already like screened and so that is the challenge. But I'm just imagining a situation where, most of the teachers have had 4-year program, then I think it would be good for schools, and even in rural areas, we'll have those teachers staying back. Currently, if they come to us, maybe it is for gaining experience for a year or so, and then they are off.
And to add on to that, in terms of the ECCE, in the new policy provisions, again, we are talking about in-service teacher training. So these Anganwadi teachers, who are graduates already, they will have to undergo a 6-month kind of training certificate. They get a certificate of a training. And the ones who are not graduates, are 10th or 12th pass, have to undergo a 1-year blended diploma program so that they can also have the capacities and be equipped to kind of, take on the new system of the education that's now going to happen. So again, I mean, that's something that is there. And similarly, assessments, I would think so, because that's one important part that we've not really spoken in detail. But again, like, how in your country, there are a lot of formative assessments and, children are not tested. And unfortunately in India, it's again a mixed system with, a lot of formal assessments also happening, like a test and exams, which overburden children. And in certain situations, there are no proper assessments being done. And I think we need to also, when we think of, equity and inclusion, we need to be able to think of the kind of assessments that are required so that certain, certain children are not at a disadvantage in terms of how we are assessing their, their overall progress. So that's something, again, one will have to consciously work on and think about the kind of assessments we do.
Thank you so much. And unfortunately, we have come to the end of our panel discussion time. Warm thanks to our panelists. I think the beginning of our name of this panel, The Bridging Perspectives, was very fulfilling, because it is really, and we have to also thank again Chinzel, the Global Innovation Network, for teaching and learning, for allowing us this momentum to come together and actually learn from one another, because it is really, when you're listening to some other education system, you learn all the time also the gaps that exist in our system also, and also the continuous conversation. I warmly welcome you to join our close-knit network also and continue these discussions onwards. Thank you, audience here in Ruusupuisto and online. Thank you. I'm just thank you. I think I will put it on now then.